Hello viewers, Matt Kayan here again. I'm an artist, I'm also an art writer, critic, and this time a YouTuber. Welcome to my channel. We have a special guest today. We always have special guests. But Charity Atukunda here is our special guest today. Charity is interested in what it means to be African or Black woman. She employs a deep research process and goes into history to create her work. So Charity, thanks a lot for giving us the time of the day to have a sit down with you and discuss, conversate around these interesting topics that we are going to uncover today. Charity, we've been engaging with your work since 2015, and since you started working professionally, that should have been around that time since you left art school. I still have a picture of that work you did at the Kampala Biennale 2016 in my mind. You know, it had some fingers, it has those, the keyboard inspired kind of thing going on. How have you changed or grown as an artist, and what is important to you now that the Charity in 2016 hadn't come face to face with?
I mean, yeah, there's been quite a lot of growth since then. It's been about at least 10 years now. I think the biggest difference between then and now is now I have more time for my work. I have more time to be in studio. I'm finally exploring, because I was mainly doing digital work, and a lot of my work was commercial, commissioned, and I kind of had to find time to make the work that I feel the most passionate about. And also experimenting with materials in studio, because when you do digital work, you're kind of on a computer all the time. But that's not really I love it, but my actual training, like the way I studied art, was really in studio, painting, drawing. Really with more tactile medium. So I've been able to kind of come back to that. But I still do digital work. The two kind of inform each other, but I've just found myself in a place where I feel like this is where I really want to be as an artist, creatively. And in terms of process, this is where I want to be right now.
We're actually right here in Charity's studio. We're lucky to have this conversation in, sacred, private place. I'm looking around and seeing some of the works you had for the show in Njabala, and then some of the works and processes that are going to lead to another body of work that you're going to come up with. And I was also wondering, who are some of the artists, maybe writers or thinkers, could be chefs, could be athletes that have inspired your thinking today?
Well, it's a big question, because I'm inspired by so many great minds, or even just life. I think life is maybe my biggest teacher. And there's many fantastic African intellectuals, thinkers. To name them all, I would think I would take up hours. And even stylistically, in terms of what inspires me visually. When we were doing Kla Art, I had the pleasure of working with Molemo. She's the Ungovernable. She runs a collective in South Africa. She's part of a collective in South Africa. And I just like the way she thinks. She really kind of, she's worked with me on several projects, but also she was one of the mentors. So she, I think for me, she kind of helped me to kind of open up my mind and think about things differently, especially as an illustrator. just more conceptual thinking towards my work. And then the other person who I had a very interesting conversation with that led me to this current body of work was the Ghanaian artist Ibrahim Mahama, is it? Yes. Yeah, so he's quite well known now. But he did again for the 32 degrees arts labs that we were doing, because it was during COVID, we did a lot of Zoom calls, and he was one of the artists that kind of chatted with us, and he had a really, he made me rethink my own thoughts and ideas about painting and what painting means, and kind of stop thinking about painting in a Western idea of, you know, you're working with acrylics, watercolors, oils, all that stuff. So I think in terms of, you know, me wanting to pursue this current body of work and the material I wanted to use and the way I've kind of had to deconstruct my own art education, I would say they've been my most two recent influences, or at least people who kind of like tipped me off to changing the direction in the way I want to work. But of course, those are just two. There are very, very many artists, and that would be a whole video and interview on its own, really critiquing my work and really looking into the influences and the things that have made it what it is today. Yeah.
I mean, you say in your bio statement, you say you are researchers. So that means you probably open a lot of books. You read a lot, should I say?
Yeah. I mean, I never realized that I was a research-based artist, kind of a research process-based artist, until I did this recent project with Njabala. The first phase of this project was researching women of the 1960s. And when Martha was talking to the artists she selected for the Njabala cohort, which was me, Lataru, Liz Kosinge, and oh my goodness, I forgot the other artist. She left, but what she said to us. She was like, you know, I've picked you guys because your process is very much research based, and I don't know why I never thought of it that way, but that is what my process really is. Yeah, I love to understand the context of things. I like to understand the context of a topic. I like to really delve into the background. I like to know what people think. I like to talk to people. I really like to go all about, I guess, all the little details I want to know before I create something final. And actually my sister helped me write my bio, and I've been repeating it for so long, but I was like, yeah, research, that's the thing I do. I'm a research-based artist, and I think, I feel like it's, because it's where I find that, like, the imagery also, when you're working in a visual arts, imagery is actually very hard. Making visual art is very hard. So I find it easier to do the research, and the research helps to inform what kind of material I use, what kind of medium I end up using to best communicate the idea I want to, you know, bring out. So for me, research is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for mentioning the Njabala exhibition. Mm-hmm. That's probably why we are sitting down today with Charity Atukunda. She recently was in a group show at the Makerere Art Gallery called Njabala. Yes. But yeah, congratulations on being part of Njabala, an elegy. The refrain by American Zambian writer Namwali Sepel, I don't want to tell you what happened, I want to tell you how it felt, guided the spirit of the exhibition. How did you respond to this, and how did your work fit into this concept?
Thank you for the congratulations. It was a very fun process. Well, fun. It was a very good thing to experience because we were dealing with such heavy topics. But yeah, it's. I mean, the thing with grief is it's a very internal process. It's a very internal feeling that everyone experiences individually. So I think it's hard to talk about grief without it being uh, all about feelings. It's hard to talk about grief without it, kind of, at the end of the day, the people who connect with you are the people who identify with that feeling or have experienced that feeling. And it doesn't always have to be a feeling of, the loss of a human being. It can also be the feeling of, a dream that didn't work out. It can be a relationship that didn't work out. It can be a computer that was stolen or whatever. It's that feeling of I've lost this thing, and it's all very much human, and it's all very internal, and it's all very much a part of the process. So it was definitely an exhibition centered around how everything feels. Yeah.
Interesting. So do you usually read, or have you come across Namwali Sipel's work?
I have not actually. That was my first time hearing it. So, but it will go on my list of many, many more things I should read and explore.
You are the only artist that employs figuration in your work in the exhibition. So some might think it is not easy or impossible to express complex narratives such as these relating to grief with figuration. They would think that figuration is often literal, and you wouldn't have several entry or exit points or views from such work.
So the thing about my work is that I try not to put myself in a particular box, that I have to be figurative, that I have to be abstract. Actually, I tend to be mostly, I do mostly focus on figuration, but working, let's say, like adjacent to Litaru, it kind of gave me a bit more confidence to not rely solely on that as a technique. So I think, the thing that about me is that I come from a background of, or at least the majority of the work I've been producing the last few years has been illustration, conceptual illustration. So when you're used to doing conceptual illustration, it's kind of how you approach a lot of composition. So for me, I wanted to express complex abstract ideas, but I kind of wanted to approach them the same way I would approach an illustration. And the challenge for me was, if I had had more time, I think there would have been even more pieces. But I think the idea for me was, how can I also express complex ideas using conceptual illustration style, but try to execute it within this material and within this topic, basically, of grief, which is very much about feeling. And I think it was successful, especially with the mingling stick. A lot of people connected with it. And I think because I kind of had to figure out how to how to bring out the feeling without focusing too much on the image. And I feel like that came out more with the object. The object itself carries a lot of emotion, or carries a lot of meaning for the Ugandan audience. So I think, and maybe that's the other thing I can talk about, I had in mind my audience, Ugandan audience, and I don't want to generalize, but it's something that I've encountered quite often, even when we were speaking to the journalists who are covering this work. They're kind of, the thing that they connect with is what's familiar to them. And what was familiar was, for example, the plants, which were part of the exhibition, because they're traditional plants. They knew the names, they knew what they were used for. And then Ugandans really quite still like very literal art. They love realism. They love, they want to see that it's a woman. They want to see that this is a person and this is what they're doing. And I think that I wanted to not alienate the Ugandan audience, because sometimes when you do create art that's too abstract, it's easy to alienate an audience because there's a kind of growth with art in the art scene or in the art world. If you think about all the Ugandans that consume art, come for exhibitions, maybe they have some kind of art education in the sense that they've grown up exposed to art, so they learn what these things mean. If you use black, they know what it means. If you use red, they know what it means. But then when you kind of start to gain a wider audience that may not necessarily be on that same level of understanding all your symbolism and all the stuff that you're putting into it, you really have to connect with them. Otherwise, you alienate them. So part of the thing is I wanted people to see figures. I wanted them to connect with figures. I wanted them to see women. I wanted them to see objects they're familiar with. I wanted them to see plants that they know and text that is within the context of the culture. Otherwise, I feel like, you know, it's you start to lose people, and that would be a shame because you're here to connect with them as an artist, not just only, you know, I think it's great to express yourself, but in expressing ourselves, we also have to be like, will I connect with my audience? So that was kind of the aim of using all these techniques.
I think that is really very important. I think artists out there, you should take note of this. It is important for your immediate audience to understand what you're trying to do. Yeah, it's not good for you to alienate yourself from those around you. But yeah, I'm looking around here and I'm seeing some of the works you showed at the Njabala show. I'm looking now, you know, critically at them, and I look at the faces. They're usually blank faces. I mean, I'm looking at the sketches as well for the upcoming work. It's the same thing. There's no eyes. There's no nose. There's no mouth. There's probably no neck. So, tell me about that bit about your work.
I mean, I think I really, again, with illustration, you kind of have to think about what you want to say to people. Because if you start to bring in expression, then you're trying to say something about that character and that image and what they're feeling. But what I'm trying to go for here is a representation. You know, like, for example, this is meant to be an allegory. It's not meant to be people per se, but representations of an idea. So, you know, it's more of like a representation of duality, like what's, you know, this I think everyone is maybe more familiar with like yin and yang, the dark within the light and the light within the dark, and how it's intertwined. That's kind of like the idea with this. But also this technique I'm working with is yet to be, it's still quite experimental. And I want to be able to create more finer detail and I guess more detailed renderings. And I hope I can get to that stage. But I need to produce more work and play with it. Because what I'm working with is charcoal, cooking charcoal. And I'm sprinkling it. So it becomes very difficult to create very fine lines with a, like you would with a pen or a pencil. But I'm trying to also employ techniques where I do both with pen and ink and also charcoal. So sometimes it's a stylistic choice because I don't want people to focus on the emotion, but rather of the face, but rather the representation of the figure. Like it's a black body or it's a body, but it's not clearly defined. It's more of a representation. So yeah.
Ah, interesting. So grief, the topic of the exhibition, is actually a significant topic among African traditional cultures. Even to this day, we still have ceremonies surrounding a funeral, and we take up some time to grieve the dead before burying them. Sometimes my colonized mind thinks it's a waste of time. Let's bury and quickly go back to work. Yeah, I usually think like that. So why do you think grieving is important now in the context of Africa? If we broaden it and we and think about the turbulent period that colonialism was.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that I discovered quite a lot of things when I was creating this work, and I think that burial rituals, one, I would say that that feeling you have of, oh, you know, it's that colonized side of you is like, oh, why are we still doing this? Let's just do the thing and go. I think that that's, yeah, a little bit, yeah, to do with colonization. Maybe also capitalism, this thing of money and time, which is very much comes with the colonial ideas that were brought to us. But also I think it's personal. Once you've lost someone close to you and you really feel that, it's those moments when people are there for you that you really feel loved and cared for in your community. So then you start to see the value of the ritual. And as someone who has lived outside of Uganda, I can say that this is a very fantastic, beautiful part of our culture. The care that people put into, because they're spending their money, they could have stayed home, they could have just sent you the money, but they've spent the money, they've got on the bus, they've taken the car, they've come all the way to see you. I think for me personally, the experience was a healing experience. It was an experience that made me feel closer to my community, closer to my family, because there was a sense of like they can catch you when you fall, because in those moments you're far too emotional to function. So you have to rely on people to hold you and take care of you. So I think in the immediate moments of loss, people really take care of you, and that's when you really learn who cares about you, who calls you, who checks in on you, who makes sure you're fine, who makes sure you have food, who makes sure that you're sleeping, who makes sure that, you know, the grieving process that you're able to manage, you know. So it's a very rich part of our culture that we should never lose. And I also think the reason why it persists is because, you know, there's many parts of our culture, despite what the colonialists tried to do, that we just could not lose because they're too important. And if anything, I would say people on the other side of the world lack this kind of communal care when they lose people. Like having lived in the US, burial does not look like what we do. It's very much, you know, it's very individual. Like if the person dies, they'll, you know, you're more worried about insurance money and, you know, getting everyone to attend the funeral. And if people don't show up, it's not that big of a deal. And, you know, it's very much, I feel like there's some loneliness to it. You know, I even know people who are like, oh, my parent passed on, but I was in another country. I just didn't want to deal with it. You know, it's very strange. So I find it, yeah, and even immediate family is not really, like they're the ones maybe who are present, but extended family. So you kind of see that the connections are far less when someone, like when you lose someone there, at least from what I've experienced and the people that I know. I think for me, having experienced burials in Uganda, I was just like blown away. I was like, the whole village comes. Sometimes they come to eat, but the fact that they come and they have to say goodbye, to me was very, very powerful. It was incredibly powerful. I mean, there, your boss will give you the day off to go bury the person, but they expect you at work the following day. While here, no one is going to stress you out. They'll be like, you know, deal with that first, then you come back to work. Even your coworkers will collect a coin and send it to you. So that's the kind of collective love that is not existent there. There, that's, hopefully you have insurance, hopefully you can afford the casket. This is why people end up cremating people. You know, you take them, you burn them, you pour the ashes in the ocean or whatever, because you don't have the money, you don't have the support system. So you kind of carry that grief by yourself. So for me, it's a very amazing part of our culture that we should never lose. And I think that over time, people appreciate the experience, especially when it's personal. So yeah, but it's important to be aware of these things. And as we grow, we just learn more and more about our own culture and why we should hold it dear. So yeah, I would encourage you to not feel that way. And also remember the impact you're making in someone's life when you actually show up for them. Yeah. So.
Interesting, because this is a little bit funny, or it could be paradoxical or contradictory, because I might feel this way about maybe somebody dying or a relative or somebody I knew or family friend. But then when it comes to these wider issues that I deal with in my work, I'm interested in decolonization and African identity, getting lost after the white man came in and everything. But then, some people, when they talk to me, when I talk about my work to them, they're like, "Why are you still, crying about these things? That happened already." So that is me grieving, I think, by
Yes.
grieving about big issues.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought up the thing about grieving, because I think it's something we don't do enough of, or we don't recognize it as grief. But for most of us, like especially for me and even Lataro, she was talking about the things that you don't know, like the things that you lose culturally and you don't know them. And you kind of recognize when you start to learn about colonialism and you're like, oh, this part of my identity was taken from me without my choice. There is a grief that we all experience collectively as Africans. And I think the people who are like, oh, why do we need to talk about this in the past? That's also a normal reaction to grief, because most people are like, yeah, if we dwell on it, it's too sad. So some people are like, I would rather move on with life and not think about this because it's very sad. But I think that it's important to recognize that in our decolonial work, or in the process of decolonization, especially those of us who critique and we talk about decolonization and all of that, we have to recognize that we are essentially grieving, and we are angry because of what was taken from us. That's a normal part of grief, to be angry for the loss. There's an injustice in it, especially when when you know the context of that loss. There's an injustice. There's so many dynamics that come with it, and the fact that they still impact us in our day-to-day life, it's definitely grief. But I think because we are always intellectualizing and talking about it in these very particular ways, I've actually read many scholars, like Mudibe, he's a fantastic scholar, but they always talk about it in an intellectual way. But I never hear any of them saying, you know what, we are grieving collectively as Africans. Anyone with black skin, Indians, whatever, we are all collectively grieving for this huge loss and pain we've had to experience. And I think that because it's a kind of a never-ending process, like there's never an end to grief, it means that it's something that we carry with us constantly, and that's very exhausting. So I do understand why some people be like, oh, I think I'm okay, I don't want to I just want to focus on my life, I want to move on. These are all very normal reactions. So I think it's important to always think of that, even when you get in your debates about colonialism and all that stuff. All the reactions people have, even white people, be like, oh, because they don't understand the grief. They don't understand what it means to have something taken from them. It's kind of like it's like if you know someone whose family member has died, but you've never experienced the loss of death yourself. There's a lack of connection. It's not that you don't care, but you've never had that experience. So how then do you begin to empathize and sympathize? The most you can say is, oh, I'm sorry. But then when you're on the receiving end, you're like, what do you mean you're sorry? Like, how do you not understand how painful this is? So I think that's it's something that we all kind of touched in with our work, recognizing that grief is not just, this very specific one we're used to. It's also that as artists and having to explore this painful dynamic of being in a post-colonial kind of world. Yeah.
All right. Of course, this is sipping into the next question. I was drawn in by one of the pieces in your corner at the exhibition. I love this work because I saw myself doing something similar. It was an excerpt from your father's book on Bachiga culture and how it became Christianized. Your father was a clergyman who also loved his Bachiga roots. Why did you choose to bring forth this a bit about your father, and how is it important in a wider context to most of us Africans in the cultural conundrum?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, of course, when I first started this show, like when we first started talking about grief, we were all reluctant because we're like, first of all, this is very sad. Secondly, you know, like I had lost my dad from COVID, 2021. So I'm still in the process. This is all like, it's only been 2.5 years now, almost 3 years. So it was a little bit like, oh, do I really want to go there? And when I first started doing this work, I thought I was only going to focus on him and the loss of him. But along the way, I kind of instead decided to include his words in this exhibition because he himself was, as you said, a clergyman. He studied theology at Princeton University, and he wrote a thesis about the Christianization of the Bachiga people. So, and this book was in our house for the longest, and I read it. But then when this exhibition was going on, I was like, I reread it, and I realized in this book he was answering so many questions I had about my own identity as a Muchiga. He started to answer questions, like he answered questions within this book about why is Uganda so Christian? Why are the Bachiga so Christian? Why do we do what we do? Why do we have 2 wedding ceremonies? You know, why do we have a giveaway and a Christian ceremony? Why do we, you know, like how did all of it go down? Like he explains in detail how the missionaries managed to, you know, disseminate the Christian ideas. He manages to explain how Bachiga mythos and cosmology had very similar things to Christianity, and therefore the Christians were able to translate some of their ideas easier. Like it was easier for Bachiga people to accept some of the ideas. For example, there's a creation myth about the God being a potter that forms a human out of clay, which is very much in the Bible. So there are just these coincidences within the Bachiga cosmos and mythos and belief systems that really were parallel to Christianity. And that's where they found success. And that's why it was integrated somehow. And the thing about it is it's never fully, it's kind of like putting a dress on top of your body. It's like it's your body underneath, but people are seeing the dress. So there's aspects of traditional spirituality that still exist, but they've kind of married into each other. So I was learning all of this, and I was like, this is very rich, but it was also answering, again, that it was addressing, again, that theme of grief for me when it comes to my identity, like what we just talked about with colonization. I had so many questions about why my culture has been changed. And so within this book, he answered a lot of those questions for me. It actually gave me some kind of peace when it comes to these questions I've had about my culture, colonization, all of that. He answered so many of them. And these are conversations I would have enjoyed to have with him when he was still alive, but that never happened. So this book ended up being quite instrumental in terms of informing the work. And the other thing he helped explain was, in parallel to Njabala's mythology, is the way in which women are valued in society, or the space in which they belong, which is oftentimes in spaces of labor. So you're only valuable based on the work that you can do and what you can achieve. And I found so many, examples of that. The one being for this work in particular, that they would bury women with their mingling sticks so that they could continue working in the next life, and the handle of the hoe. So they bury them with all their tools so they continue working in the next life. So then you start saying, so even when you're dead, you're still expected to work. So that's where I was like, okay, this also makes a lot of sense. Why our culture also, women are expected to, have all of this labor, like be the wife, be the mother, be the working woman, cook for your husband, like just provide in every level, emotional, physical labor, everything. And I thought that was very interesting because, these things, just because there was colonization and Christianization, these values are also in line with what the Bible teaches, but also it was originally part of our culture. So I feel like it was good for me to understand where does that come from? Where do these ideas come from about how women are treated and how they are looked at within this African society? So that was very good for me to also know. It was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. As someone who's worked in the corridors of power as regards the local cultural scene here in Kampala, you were a cultural coordinator at the Alliance Française. What change do you want to see on the Kampala art scene?
Oh, that's also another good question. The changes I want to see are support, specifically financial support, that is tailored. Well, I will get to that. I want to see more financial support that is specifically tailored to Ugandan artists' needs. So you asked from where? Yeah, institutions like the Alliance Française where I worked, which I feel like they kind of tried to improve. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Institutions like the Goethe Zentrum, even not necessarily those particular institutions, or even like the British Council, or any of these European bodies bringing money in. Even the person who is owning a bar and is, having an event or whatever, or even let's say like a Talent Africa doing nyege nyege, all this stuff. I think there needs to be, if they're not giving you money, they're giving you a platform, or they're doing something with you that is more tailored to your needs, which I know may seem like, what are you talking about? Like, people need to make money. But I think, for example, for like the institutions who bring money into Uganda, the funding bodies, they really need to be more sensitive about how they give money. I'm a firm believer in just give money. Like, don't ask people to jump through hoops. Stop asking everyone to do something about climate change. Climate change is very important, but what people are missing here is, like, we need to fund people's imaginations, Like, you need to just give someone money to pay their rent, and they just create good work for you. Because I find that a lot of artists end up having to tailor themselves, Like, if you see a call for climate change something, then all of a sudden you're adjusting your work. You're like, well, I work with, fabric, so I'm now trying to reduce the amount of fabric waste in the world by working with fabric. And then you're like, okay, well, let's see if they'll give me money for that. And so I find that very, like, disappointing. I'm like, give money. First of all, give artists money to pay rent. Like that, if you just do that, you're already doing the most. Let them pay their rent, give them materials, and let them make work. And then I think the other important thing is there's not enough people out there. There's too many gatekeepers and not enough. Actually, there's very few people who are gatekeepers, but there's not enough ways you're not gonna all of a sudden get enough money to go on flights, take yourself to Europe, go to all these places, meet collectors, do all this stuff. So there's not enough support in that kind of way. And there's also definitely not enough support for women, female artists. So I think that's why Njabala is important, like supporting women, making sure women have space to create, and also specifically promoting them in a very particular way to talk about what they need to. So yeah, I think those are things we need in a very broad sense.
I mean, you talked about funding. Don't you also need money from local entities?
Yes, yeah, we definitely that. Like, for me, I prefer Ugandans to buy my work than for my work to leave the country. But we also have to be real. Like, a lot of Ugandans don't have money, and a lot of the Ugandans I find that appreciate the art that I create are like they always say, one day when I have that money, I'm gonna buy an artwork. And that's just the reality of the situation, you know. Uganda has yet to be in that like economically stable space where it's buying a lot of art. And I feel like even the people who are economically stable, who have a lot of money, I rarely find them entering into these spaces. So I think there's also something to be said about like what is this art scene or art being made in Uganda like? Who is it being made for? Who is buying the work? And the fact that the work ends up leaving the country, you know, says something about who we end up making the work for. But I think for Uganda, there's a need for the society to catch up with what the artists are producing and creating. And that's when it gains value within the country. And art sometimes is also an indicator of how well an economy is doing, you know? It means that the people are wealthy enough, well enough to spend money on art. So we have to be mindful that, you know, it's going to take time for many Ugandans to be fighting over a Mad Cayenne piece or a charity piece, you know. It's going to take time. But we'll eventually get there if we don't have any wars in the next decade or two. We'll eventually get there. And improve government and all that stuff, and you know, the general well-being of the average citizen. We'll get there, but that takes time. So yeah.
We just need to be a little patient, I guess.
Patient.
We just need to continue fighting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Would you want to talk about any future projects the viewers should be on the lookout for? Maybe save up money to have a charity Atukunda in their living room or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be an exhibition on the 24th of April, sorry, the 25th of April at Design Hub called Send Me, which is curated by Cara Blackmore, and it'll be about freedom of expression, freedom, and it's centered around Transition Magazine, which was the first magazine ever created in Uganda during the colonial transition period around the 60s. And it was born in Makerere, but it's really quite political, and it centers around, you know, what does it mean to be an artist, to talk about freedom, to express yourself, what is the cost that we pay for trying to express ourselves, all these things. Also, it's also in an East African context, since the magazine was kind of East African centered at first, and then it grew to be Africa, like all of Africa, and now it's a magazine about the African diaspora. So yeah, it's going to be a great show with amazing work. I'll be featured, and Gloria Chichancho and Sadiq, I forget Sadiq's other name, but he's a Sudanese artist, and so we'll be having that show quite soon. I don't know when this episode will air, but hopefully people will follow up and show up, but also they can check out my website once everything is done. If they miss any of the work and just want to see it, it'll be on my website, which I think you can include in the descriptions. Yes.
All right. That is a show you should watch out for. I love the concept behind it. It's something that could speak to me as well.
Yes.
So people should look out for that show. Look out for more of charity. Thanks a lot for being with us all through this conversation. I mean, we could go on the whole day and discuss and converse with charity, but we have to leave her now. This is the best we could milk from her. I hope you enjoyed it. Stick around and watch out for more of these videos. I'm supposed to be doing a whole series around this exhibition and this project in Njabala, and I'll try to get you as much more artists that were part of this project as possible. But yeah, this is what we had today. Do the good stuff, like and subscribe to my channel, and help me push the gospel forward, the gospel arts. Thank you.